issues of loneliness. What exactly is loneliness and how widespread is it in our society?
Loneliness really often stems from isolation. So very many people find themselves in an isolated situation, which can lead to loneliness. In fact, in our country, 1.2 million people, not necessarily older people, but a large majority, experience chronic loneliness. So that's the most severe feelings of loneliness, when you're feeling not in touch with the outside world.
And how widespread is it?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge, and it's also a growing concern for our country, for our communities, and there's just so many reasons why people are in an isolated, lonely situation. Reasons of recent bereavement. It may be a bereavement many years ago. It could be an illness. It could be a financial factor. It could be simply having recently retired and suddenly not being surrounded by people every day at work as you've perhaps been used to, and it's crippling in many ways, both physically and mentally, for many people. And as I say, it is many older people.
So something changes in their life,
Yeah.
and suddenly they're trapped in this
Yeah.
sense of loneliness. I was looking up some research that is published on AgeUK's website, and it suggests there are 2.9 million people over 65 living in the UK who feel they haven't got anyone to turn to for help and support. And AgeUK has a campaign called "No One Should Have No One." So what's the scale of loneliness in Peterborough?
Well, I mean, the scale of loneliness will be along the same lines as the rest of the country. But if we can just kind of put it into some kind of perspective, if we talk about our older population, by the year 2036, the population of 85 plus age group is expected to rise by over 165%. So if you imagine that over half of all people aged 75 or over actually live alone, you can start to see how many people would consider themselves to be lonely. And we have to remember as well, you can be surrounded by a room full of people but still have feelings of loneliness because of your personal circumstances, and it's how we tackle that together.
So loneliness is more to do with what's going on in the way you think and the way you feel, rather than who you're with.
It very much can be, but it can be the isolation as well. And as I said, there's so many reasons why people can feel isolated and lonely, and actually losing confidence because you're in an isolated situation can escalate the feelings of loneliness, the feelings of isolation, and then it's a slippery slope, and it's very difficult to find yourself back in a position where you feel part of your community, you feel you can ask for help, you have the confidence to ask for help, because losing your confidence is, when you're older, can be really difficult to get back, and it's knowing that there's networks of support out there to actually tackle this loneliness together. And older people have such a worth in our society, and we need to remember that, but actually feeling that you have a purpose in society can help bring those feelings of confidence back to a person and improve mental well-being. There's a very overused fact that we hear very often, but I will say it again. Feelings of loneliness can be as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that just kind of demonstrates the scale of impact that it can have on your physical and mental well-being over time.
So AgeUK is very involved in this, and what can you do to help overcome and combat loneliness?
There's lots of ways we can help to overcome loneliness. We offer a vast number of services, starting from an information and advice service where people can contact us for many reasons. It might be that they have a housing or a financial issue. They may feel they are entitled to a welfare benefit and we can check that for them. But also they can call to say, actually, I'm feeling lonely. Can you help me, please? Is there some support out there? We have social type services where we can offer regular support in a person's home through a community support at home service. Perhaps somebody's been recently discharged from hospital and they aren't able to get out into the community, and we can offer a free service where we make daily contact with that person to keep them in touch with the local community. We can help somebody enjoy their home still by offering cleaning, gardening. We have 11 friendship clubs where we empower people to volunteer to actually lead the friendship clubs, and we support them and they become a sustainable club. And there's over 350 older people in Peterborough alone who attend those clubs on a weekly basis. And we mustn't forget all of our volunteers who visit older people in their own homes, regular weekly get-togethers for a cup of tea and a chat. And I think for me that, well, for us as an organisation, it's very clear that volunteering is beneficial for both the person who's the recipient, the beneficiary, but also the volunteer. Because there are people who feel isolated, lonely, but are still able to get out, and actually making that connection with another person can be so wonderful for their well-being, and forming that friendship, that bond that can last for many, many years.
So somebody who's lonely, who perhaps is able to get out or get along to one of these clubs, these groups, what sort of things do the groups do? Oh,
so many things. Yes. There's some really wonderful stories about our friendship clubs. They meet regularly, they get together, and I say I'm talking about a collective group of people, and I would say that everybody within those clubs has a part to play. It could be collecting the fees, because everybody pays a small fee each week to enable the model to be sustainable. It could be helping with cooking the lunch, homemade lunches. I mean, they're wonderful. You should come one day. Calling out the bingo numbers, giving out the raffle prizes. So there's lots of activities that go on at the clubs, but there's people there who will listen, and you can have a chat with and a cup of tea. But very often they do go out for, there's organised trips, perhaps to the coast or the theatre. And one particular group, they've actually been on holiday together recently, and that's as a result of making and forming these friendships. So it's so beneficial.
So how would somebody find out about a club? Well,
if they would like to contact us, then we have a website. It's AgeUK, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. That takes you to the local website and you can contact us. Or we have a helpline. Can I give the number out? Is that okay?
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's 0300 666 9860, and that's our first point of contact for inquiries, and we can then point you in the right direction of one of our 11 clubs.
That's 0300 666 9860.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. You talked about volunteers who might provide a more close one-to-one type of service. How do people become volunteers for this?
Well, we do promote the opportunity rather widely. We promote lots of volunteering opportunities. But again, if somebody's interested in volunteering, they can either follow the link on our website or phone the 0300 number, as we refer to it.
Yes.
And and let us know that they're interested, and we can have a chat and come in and perhaps have an induction. We do ask that volunteers take the DBS check, which you'll be familiar with, and we ask for a couple of references as well. But it's we want people to know that they are as much part of the organisation as a paid member of staff, and without volunteers we wouldn't exist. So we've recently included a catalogue of volunteering opportunities on our website, which actually, rather than just talking about the opportunities, we thought it would be really useful for people to understand if there's a commitment involved in the volunteering and actually what the role involves, so that there's a whole array of, from befriending, visiting people in their own homes, to supporting in day centres, friendship clubs, even down to admin or handing out our leaflets, because actually that's a good way of people knowing where they can find help.
So if you didn't feel that you were up to a one-to-one visiting offering of volunteering, perhaps there would be something else you could join in with.
Definitely. And also, it's not an exhaustive list. If a person has an idea that they think could be beneficial to us in a volunteering capacity, then we'd love to hear from you, because it's a growing it's a growing opportunity. And somebody recently said to me, a gentleman who has volunteered actually to help during interviewing new members of staff, and he said that the biggest thing about getting older is wanting to feel that you still have a purpose in life. And that meant quite a lot to me, and actually the organisation works by the support that is given by volunteers, and many of whom would consider themselves to be older people too.
Now, in one sense, I imagine this one-to-one volunteering, is it a sort of befriending, would you call it that?
Yes.
Is quite straightforward in the fact that you're having a conversation with somebody, perhaps over a cup of tea.
That's right, yeah.
But on the other hand, perhaps you've also got to look out for this person.
Yeah.
They are lonely in some way. There might be other complexities in their life.
Yeah.
What sort of training would a volunteer need to go through?
Well, we provide an induction, which talks very much about the organisation and our offering as an organisation, which gives a good background to other types of support that's available. So should there be a complexity, which we would like to think we knew about, but before we match and introduce two people, but at least the volunteer then has the open door to come and say, actually, I think we need a little bit more help here, and perhaps a bit more intervention. But the training would involve training on dementia awareness, because obviously we actively help people to stay living at home as long as they can, and continue to have their independence. But there will be people with mild dementia who we would visit. There will be people who may have their own mental health difficulties, and we would want people to be aware of that. They would learn about, as I say, benefits as well, and the way that they can actually access those, but also about the wider network of voluntary organisations and the other support services that are out there. And we really do support our volunteers, so they know that if they are concerned about anything, they can contact the organiser of the service, and we will be there to, and we will make a phone call or visit to the person that we're supporting, the older person, and raise those concerns.
So they're not just left on their own on a one-to-one visiting schedule? And
No, it's a friendship, and between the two people they can decide when the visits take place. We like to call it sharing time, because it's so beneficial, and actually we're thinking that we will perhaps call the service that in the future, but it is about sharing time. It's not about doing something, it's about sharing that experience and actually working together for both parties to benefit.
And in my own work as a vicar of a local parish, when I visited older people, they have such stories to tell. And it's wonderful to hear their lives and to inquire a little into what life was like in this country 50, 60, 70 years ago.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, another area of work that we are expanding, let's say, is intergenerational work, because there's been so much on television, hasn't there, of very young children that are spending time with older people in a care home setting. But actually bringing older people together with perhaps a local nursery, we do that in one of our day centres, it just gives such a boost to everybody, and as you say, there's so much to share, so much to give to the younger generation, so many skills to pass on as well, and stories, which people like hearing, you know, and if we're not careful we will lose that. So it's important that we capture it and share that time together.
I have a lovely story to tell of a gentleman at my church. A little while ago, the Beaches Primary School were learning about evacuation during Second World War. And we found that this gentleman himself had been evacuated from London. And rather nervously, he came to the school and sat down with the class. But as soon as they showed an interest and an attentiveness to his story, they were enwrapped. And he also really loved it. I spoke to him last week, and 2 years on, he's still remembering with fondness that visit he paid. Yeah,
it's wonderful. It's I should imagine his nerves left him as soon as he had the smiles on the faces. It's brilliant, and it's an area that I would love to see us, you know, further, you know, do further work in those areas. We've had schools come and sing at Christmas and such like at groups, but like I say, it's the skills that can be passed on that if we're not careful, you know, we will lose those skills because everything's so technical these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, I'm imagining there are knock-on effects of the support you give, and I was thinking of things like less call on the ambulance service and social care, and perhaps less need to visit the GP or to seek mental health support. Have you had any examples of that?
Yeah, we tend to term our work preventative work, and yes, if we can prevent a person needing the intervention of health or social care, then we're obviously making a cost saving to our statutory services. But there's the social aspect as well of the feelings of feeling better because we're not having to access those services. But it's a common fact that actually so many GP appointments are taken up by people who are lonely, who perhaps present with a different matter. And we appreciate how busy GPs, other health professionals are, but if we can just leave our leaflets in a surgery, just to flag up that actually, do you know, just with that little bit of input from a voluntary organisation, there are many, there's not just AgeUK, it can prevent those visits, it can improve a person's mental well-being, and therefore they don't need the input. For time, we can delay that need. Physically as well, physically, people's, physical appearance and physical well-being can be improved by just having that contact with other people.
Now, older people that I've met are very often fiercely independent, but also perhaps rather fearful of losing control of their future and their independence. And then, therefore, to admit that they're lonely could start them on a slippery slope, they think, of other people ruling their lives. How do we overcome that?
From our perspective, I would really want to reassure older people that our mission is to help people to keep their independence. And if that involves a tiny little bit of help to remain independent, then actually just try it because it can have such an impact. If you think about a person who loves their garden and then perhaps they've become unwell and they can't manage their garden, they're perhaps thinking, do you know, I'm going to have to move because this is too much for me. If us or another organisation just give that small amount of help each week or every fortnight, it helps the person to enjoy their home for a start, but it makes them feel better and they're safer in that environment because things are tidier and then they don't appear vulnerable as well. That's the other aspect. So we're certainly here to help people keep that independence. Just a small amount of input can delay any need for bigger interventions such as care or care homes, which comes back to the cost saving that you referred to earlier.
And I get the impression, having met you and spoken to you about all of this, that it's not about AgeUK imposing any particular solution.
No.
It's about your offering and explaining what they might like to take advantage of. Absolutely.
And one size doesn't fit all. And we've talked about one-to-one sharing time together. That isn't necessarily the key. You know, we like to take a person-centred approach. We talk to a person, we listen, and it's absolutely key to listen to a person's wants and needs within reason. We can't guarantee a lottery win, but we can help to put wishes into place. And it might be somebody would like to visit a garden centre once a week and go for a cup of tea and a cake. If that's what the person would like, then we will help to put those wishes into place. So it's not about doing to people, it's about helping them to make things come true that they've perhaps enjoyed in the past.
Now, if somebody knows an older person or perhaps is a relative of an older person who they think is lonely, can they get in touch for advice?
Definitely. And we would never make a referral without the permission of an older person. However, we can give out so much information, and it might be that we can send leaflets or direct a person to a website that they can then share with the person that they're concerned about. We talk about big society. I mean, that's quite a few years ago that started, but it really doesn't hurt to knock on the door of a person that you're concerned about and ask, you know, perhaps they might like a chat. They're just very shy and nervous about doing so.
Now, you are from AgeUK, but I know a lot of people still refer to Age Concern or Help the Aged. Can you help us understand what those all are?
Of course. So back in 2010, AgeUK nationally, because we're an independent charity, which is a partner of the national, bigger, wider charity, but AgeUK nationally and Help the Aged merged and formed. Age Concern and Help the Aged merged to form AgeUK, and we were locally one of the first adopters of that brand name. So that's where the partnership and the formation came about. 2 years ago this April, AgeUK Peterborough and AgeUK Cambridgeshire merged. So we are now a bigger charity covering the whole area.
And here you are. I'd welcome everyone to look you up on the internet or to phone that number. We're heading for a short break in a few seconds. After the break, we'll be learning about a charity that works locally and nationally to provide homes and much more for some of the most vulnerable people in society. But meanwhile, thank you, Melanie, for coming on to Community Matters, the radio show for all communities. For Peter and it's done. It's finished.
You're listening to Salaam Radio, and it's now time for Isha Azan.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير. رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته وبسم الله. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه.
This is Salaam Radio, Peterborough's Muslim community radio, broadcasting on 106.2 FM.
Welcome back to our listeners to Salaam Radio 106.2 FM and online at salamradio.co.uk and on Facebook and YouTube Live. This is Adrian Holdstock presenting Community Matters, the radio show for all communities across Peterborough and beyond. My second guest tonight is Ed Walker, who describes himself as a husband, a father, and who works for Hope into Action. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, before we get on to Hope into Action itself, I hear that you spent 9 years in war zones, including 3.5 years in Darfur as an aid worker. How did all that come about?
Well, I certainly didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to spend 9 years doing that. I went out on a 6-month contract when I was 22 to a country called Burundi. I didn't really know what I was doing. I couldn't speak the language. I couldn't speak French. And thought I'd just go on a nice 6-month contract. And then, anyway, enjoyed it so much. I extended for a year. Burundi then was the most dangerous country in the world, according to the UN. So we certainly saw no end of violence, pretty close up as well. I came back, couldn't find another job, so I said I'll sign up again, went to Sudan.
What were you doing in Burundi?
The program in Burundi was doing, at that time, it was just after the genocide. There was a genocide in Rwanda, which is north of there, and a trickle genocide in Burundi. So the program I was on was doing water, agriculture, health education, sanitation, building schools, building hospitals. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was supposed to be doing logistics, so trying to get the right stuff to the right place in the right time.
Gosh. So then you went back to Sudan?
Then I went to South Sudan, which then was one country. It's now two countries. At that point, I was in what was called rebel-held Sudan, and I didn't go anywhere controlled by the government from the north. So I actually met the now president, a guy called Salva Kiir, when he was a rebel commander under a tree in a place called Rumbek. And I did a year there. That was probably that was the hardest year of my life. It was very, very remote. All food had to be flown in. No tarmac anywhere. No health facilities. No pumped water. Nothing. So I was just alone. I was the only Westerner in that entire community for a year. So that was fun.
Now, Darfur is a region in the west of Sudan, bordering Chad, in northeast Africa. When you were there, what sort of cultural and religious population did it have? And what was life like for a Western Christian in a Muslim African country?
Well, culturally, I mean, it was very, very deeply Islamic. It was probably one of I think there were 6 churches. Darfur, it's a part of Sudan, but it's the size of France and it has the population of Paris. So it's a vast area. It's desert or semi-desert. The culture varies. You kind of, the clash was really between the kind of Arabalists that farmed the land and grew crops, and then the pastoralists who grazed camels. And what happened is, partly due to desertification, partly because of kind of an Arab agenda, the pressure on those two communities grew and grew and grew. So when they used to graze their cattle earlier and earlier in the year, and that was one of the drivers to the conflict. And you had a massive conflict between really the pastoralists who are farming animals and the Arabalists who are farming the ground, which is interesting because the first ever conflict recorded in the Bible is between Cain and Abel. One had animals, the other farmed the land.
Yes.
And actually, even if you go back to Burundi, between the Tutsis and the Hutus, same thing applied. The Tutsis farm the cows, the Hutus farm the land. So it's just interesting to see those dynamics come out again and again and again throughout history.
And how did you feel you survived as a Christian in that very Islamic land?
People, I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, with the government, we had to be very, very careful about everything we did. Partly that was just because we were Western and they didn't want us in there. We had a lot of staff, so we knew what was going on. We would tell, or they worried that we would tell the government of England and the West. As a Christian, of course, you're going in helping really needed populations, and they... as a Christian, I felt it was a front end of the gospel. I felt this is a way of bringing peace. I felt it was a way of bringing understanding and due respect. And I would have conversations over lunch and supper. We would all eat round a table together with our hands all dipping into the same food, whoever we were. Often we would sleep together under the stars next to our Muslim brothers or sisters. And so we became very close. We worked together. We got shot at together. We worked hard together. They saw that when their guys were hurt or injured or ill, we really cared for them. We put our lives at risk for the populations we were serving. And that earned our respect. I didn't see any converts. That wasn't part of our agenda. We didn't ever bring any Bibles in, but we would talk about our faith. And we had so much in common because they understood prayer better than most people. My British friends, they understood faith in a way that most of my British friends wouldn't. And they understood, Jesus even. So we had differences of opinion, of course, but we had a lot of commonality, and that created a very close bond.
Oh, wonderful. Then you've come back and settled in Peterborough, and you work for Hope Into Action. Well, actually, I read from the website that you are its executive director. Basically, what does Hope Into Action do?
Well, in a nutshell, Hope Into Action enables churches to house the homeless. And as we all know, coming out of this cold snap and the beast from the east, homeless are a part of the population, and they're a part of the population actually in every city. And as a Christian, I am passionate about seeing churches do that and do that well. I know your church, Adrian, actually was within 3 hours opened its doors in that cold snap and let people in. I was, as a Christian, very proud of those actions. And as a Christian, I'm very proud of the fact that 50 churches now have got a house for the homeless across this country.
Gosh.
And we work with them. We together try and love those people, irrespective of their belief systems. Our job is to love those tenants. And if the tenants feel loved by us, we've succeeded.
So what's the actual model of operating?
Well, the idea is if you have some money kicking around, and I mean a good amount of money, then what are you going to do with it? Your option really is either you can put it into a bank account or savings account or stocks and shares, and there's nothing wrong in any of that. But when you do that, you're sharing your money with the rich. I've never met a poor stockbroker because he takes your money, he makes money on it, he gives you just a slice of the money he's made. So I don't have any problem with that. No ethical problems with that, particularly. But why don't we also share our money with the poor? There are verses in the Bible that encourage us to do that, where the early Christians did that. And what does that look like? How do you share your wealth with the poor in 21st century England? Well, I say sharing is different from giving, because when I tell my daughter to share her sweets, actually she's giving them away. She won't get those sweets back. When my daughter shares her doll, actually she'll get that doll back. So that's a different type of sharing. So if you want to share your wealth with the poor, you can let it go for 5 years by putting it into a house for the homeless, and then at the end of 5 years you can take it back, just like my daughter takes back her doll. That money has worked for you because it's in bricks and mortar. Hopefully the bricks and mortar have appreciated in value, but at the same time it's been shared with the homeless, and there's a social return on your investment because some homeless people have had a home.
I think I might be a little worried about the house staying safe and being looked after.
Yeah, when I first started this, actually, my dad said the same thing to me. And what I said to him is, I pretended to be slightly more confident than I was then, but I looked him in the eye and said, why would they do that? And the principle is, if you give someone something they care for, that they value, they will then care for it. If you show them respect by giving them a really nice house, they will respect you back. And that, when my dad asked me that 8 years ago, I was quite nervous inwardly, though I pretended not to be. Now I can look you in the eye and I can say, come and have a look at our maintenance records. Come and look at our average expenditures on our houses. That doesn't mean occasionally they go into disrepair, or occasionally people do trash them or hit the wall through or something like that. But most of the time, most landlords would take our maintenance budgets per annum per house.
And then the tenants, how do you choose who's going to live in the house and for how long?
Well, the principle under which we choose, so as a Christian, I try and follow Jesus. Who did Jesus do his outreach, and how did he select people he did his outreach to? And when I read the Bible, I see virtually every miracle recorded in the Bible that Jesus did, the person came to Jesus first, actually. So if you think of blind Bartimaeus, who screamed out for the miracle of Jesus, everyone ignored him. Jesus ignored him, actually, until he carried on screaming. Then Jesus stopped, and I'll give you other examples. And so we try and set it up in the same way. If you want our house at Hope into Action, you've got to scream out to us. In other words, you've got to turn up to the meeting before you move in. You've got to turn up to the second meeting, and if that doesn't put you off, and the house rules don't put you off, and we've got a good feeling about you, and you've still got a good feeling about us, well, let's see if we can't make a miracle happen. And in terms of how long they stay, we try and work to a 2-year phase. And for some people, that's quite a long time, because it's like, well, can't you do stuff quicker than that? And we're like, no, actually, real change to earn trust, for people to get their life sorted, it doesn't happen overnight. And that's part of what we would say. All people actually don't have too high expectations of what these guys can do, because actually, if we just reflect on myself and how hard I found changing myself, you'll understand how hard what you're asking them to do is. But if needs be, and if someone is still very vulnerable, we think it'd be foolish to move them on. Well, why would you move them on if they're just going to backslide at the point of move on? Some people bounce through in a couple of months, even a couple of weeks. Our average is 11 months. A good intervention might take 18 months to 2 years.
And you mentioned the involvement of local churches. Has each house got a church associated with it? How does that work?
Yeah, every single house we open is in partnership with a church, and every single church has to commit to providing a group of volunteers to be prepared to love and engage with and be friends with the tenants in our houses. And if any church can stump up 5 to 9 volunteers, then we'll say, great, we'll partner with you. We don't really mind what colour of church you are. We don't really mind how big and flashy your songs are. We don't particularly mind about some of your theologies. If you want to care and love the poor, then we'll be your partner. We'd love to partner with you.
And those people are trained as mentors, I gather.
Yeah, so we would come along, we would train them up, and we want to love the Lord God with all our mind. You know, Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your mind." So we try and avoid being well-intentioned muppets. That's the kind of what we want to do. We want to be well thought through. There's a verse in the Bible that says, "May your love abound more and more with knowledge and depth of insight." So we believe in knowledge, and depth of insight. We believe in getting experts along to teach us how to love, how to mentor, how to befriend, how to ask questions well, how to listen well. And we're all on a journey on that the whole time. I'm learning the whole time how to be a better listener, better friend, better husband, better father, all of that. You know, none of us are perfect.
I love to work with people who are struggling but showing a willingness to want to change and overcome the difficulties they've had, whether it's homelessness for whatever reason, or maybe an addiction, or maybe crime that's led to imprisonment. And now they're starting to try and get back on the ladder of society, the ladder of independent living. But I wonder sometimes if church members are going to feel that rather daunting to have the responsibility for 2 young men or 2 young women in their local house. Now, do you provide other support that gets involved in that?
Yeah, so we've got a professional that will work alongside you, and the idea is we try and take a lot of the difficult areas away from the church. So churches aren't necessarily experts in housing benefit, they're not necessarily experts in fire safety, liaising with other agencies, so we will do that. But I think following Jesus should be daunting. That's kind of my view. I think when Jesus calls us, usually we're scared. I think there's plenty of biblical precedent for that. And I think he often calls us away from the crowds and into storms. So part of me thinks, yeah, that's the deal. You know, the deal is you follow Jesus, you're gonna be daunted. And then when you aren't daunted, it forces you onto your knees and you pray a bit more than you might otherwise have done. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't help people through that. I'm not suggesting that. But I do think a walk of faith ought to involve fear, because that's what I read in the Bible. When God calls people, they tend to feel fear. And I can give countless examples of that from the Bible. So I'm quite comfortable with the concept that people will feel fear if they partner with us.
I love this description on your website. It says, "Our dream is to change the lives of the most disadvantaged in our society by finding them homes rather than a bed for the night. We also offer them professional support, as well as linking them with local mentors who help them become positive members of society again. Our model moves away from placing tenants into state-funded hostels and into good quality accommodation with links to the local community." That's a wonderful vision, and it's working. You've been, I think, 8 years now you've been going at this?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's what we're trying to do. Of course, it doesn't always work 100%, but Adrian's been very modest here. He and I work with a guy, and I bumped into him the other day, actually. He's still got a job, and he was in prison a couple of times. And he's been promoted in his job. He's now managing people in a warehouse, and he's with a girlfriend. He's living with his girlfriend. And so I said to him, well, if you're managing people, it doesn't matter if they've got a pulse, you've got a problem, because in my experience of managing people is always there's challenges that come with that. So I said to him, so tell me what your issues are. And actually then we could chat on a much more, as a manager to a manager.
Sure.
And what we talk about this word mutuality. We want to try and everyone is created equal to me, and if you can get to the point of mutuality where you can respect each other and listen to each other and offer each other advice, not just me being the hero or the rescuer with the great, support package, ideally. And I think Jesus talks about that, because he says when you go and visit people in prison, when you visit people on the edge of society, you'll meet me. So it's a sense that we will gain from genuine interaction when it's effective. So that's just one example of how we did meet a guy in prison, and he's now flourishing. And I can learn, no doubt, from his managerial skills.
Yeah. Now, last Friday, I think you had your annual conference. How did that go?
Yeah, thank you. It was amazing. I mean, we had 300 people from across the country who came, and you think, why have all these people come to this conference? Well, maybe there's something in their heart that is inspired by the thought that their church can do something about housing the homeless, and do something well, do something that's good, do something that's holistic. And so our job is to inspire them and to equip them, and that's what we try to do. We don't try and... there are people there whose church is housing the homeless not under Hope into Action banner, and we welcome them wholeheartedly because they're also doing great work, and we want to hope that something from the day inspires and equips them. My personal favourite, and I'll say this because I don't think they're listening, was a former addict who was a former prostitute who came up and said, when I was on drugs, I went into church, and my experience was of this. Some places I got judged and I got told that God will love me when I'm clean. And in other churches I got loved, and I said God, and I was told that God loves me while I'm still dirty. And in a sense, when she said that, most of us felt convicted, because the reality is, myself included, we're much closer to the former. And Jesus said, do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. But I find that very hard. Very easy to understand, but very hard to actually percolate into the corners of my heart.
Yeah. I know from previous conferences, I wasn't able to make this one, I was taking a funeral, but previous years you've had some really renowned speakers, including the former Archbishop of Canterbury, no less. But for me, at those conferences, the people that were really telling were the tenants themselves, or the former tenants, who were able to tell the stories of how their lives had turned around.
Yeah, and that's that we got. I think we had at least 10 tenants or former tenants sharing out on Friday, and that embodies our ethos, because our ethos is that God will speak to us through those on the edge of society, as well as the experts. So we have some experts there, but not exclusively experts. And I can guarantee that people were more moved, as you said, by the tenants and the former tenants than they were by the experts. The experts may have fed their mind very well, but our tenants and the more power came through our tenants. I'm very well. I always do. I kind of do the opening speech, and I'm really aware people will forget everything I say and remember what the next person says, because I always then interview our tenants. So I try and keep my talk really short and get straight onto the important people.
If somebody had some spare capital, we're thinking, what, 10,000, 20,000 or something like that, that they wanted to share with the poor, with the homeless, how could they go about that through Hope into Action's model?
Well, first of all, fairness up, what we would probably do is find you another, let's say, 8 or 10 people who had a similar amount of capital until you've got enough to buy an actual home. And then the idea is you would own a percentage of that home. So if you've got 10,000 and the house is worth 100,000, you will own 10% of that house. You'll transfer your money to the solicitor, not to Hope into Action. We don't see your money. The solicitor does the transaction, the legal work, and you will own 10% of that house. And at the point of sale, you will still own 10% of that house. So if it's gone up in value, you'll get more money. If it's gone down in value, you'll take less money. If that interests anyone listening, get on our website, email us, and we'll follow it up with a phone call.
Wonderful. What if somebody wanted to help by way of volunteering in some way? Is there an opportunity there?
There's always opportunities to volunteer. We've always got more work than we can do. So yeah, my view on volunteering is if it's got to be mutually beneficial. So if you come and you're really good at baking eggs, and I get you to boil the kettle, well, actually, that you're going to do a bad job boiling the kettle, and you won't be happy. So my view always, if someone says I really like to volunteer, would be to sit down, have a coffee, just chat about what you're passionate about, chat about what you're good at, and I'll then think, or whoever we chat with you thinks, is there any way we can use those skills and those talents to benefit us, that will genuinely benefit us? And if we can find a match, then we'll try and say, come on, let's move this forward. Let's see if we can find something.
Wonderful. Now, the concept of Hope into Action you launched in Peterborough. When St Mark's came on board 5 years ago, we were your 10th house in Peterborough. But since then, you've grown nationwide. Where have you got houses other than here?
We have houses in Cambridge, Norwich, Nottingham, Eastbourne, Ipswich, Wolverhampton, Mid-Sussex, Isle of Wight, and a few others, Clacton, and various others, yeah.
And you're over the 50 mark?
We now have 53 homes, yeah.
Wonderful, well done.
And 50 churches, yeah.
And what's your growth plan?
Well, we've learned actually, and we don't have a lot of power over when the phone goes and someone says, I've got some money, I can buy you a house. So we don't have a plan so much, but we do. We have worked out that if we continue growing at roughly the same pace we are, that by the end of 2020 we'll be somewhere between 85 and 100 houses. And therefore, we don't beat anyone with any targets and say you must get to this number of houses. But we do think it's wise to plan for that probability, and therefore we need to be able to put in place now the systems and the people we need to support that over the next 3 years.
I think Peterborough can be proud that we've got Ed Walker, the Chief Executive of Hope into Action, here in our city, and the national headquarters of Hope into Action here in our city, indeed in my parish of St Mark's Church. Have you any final messages to share on the work that you've been doing and the ambitions that you have?
No, to be honest, you've asked me some really good questions. I'm really happy. What I would say is, Adrian, I think you're a great guy. We hold you and your church in very high regard. It's a great honour to be here. Thank you for asking these questions and showing an interest. And yeah, thank you. Well,
that's been wonderful. But I do want to ask you one more slightly, perhaps more tricky question, and that is, Peterborough was the place where Food Bank first extended its reins from being a Christian charity to allowing a mosque to be involved in being an outlet for Food Bank. It's still very much a Christian-led charity, but Khadija Mosque, I believe, is also a place where Food Bank material can be handed out. Hope into Action is a model that's based on people of faith, people who love God and love their neighbour. Is there an opportunity perhaps for mosques to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about interfaith work. I believe in faiths working together. We've worked with one organisation in Leicester, which is called One Roof, where it has it's about churches and mosques and I think other religions coming together to try and do that. And we've helped them set up a house for the homeless. So we'd be delighted to help any mosque set up a house for the homeless if they so wanted.
And that would be on an independent basis rather than as a Hope into Action?
It would, yes, because it's in our strapline it says enabling churches. So, that's the deal. But that we're absolutely clear. If anyone from any other faith, a synagogue or a community group, wants to understand what we do, we would be delighted to help them. And we have done in the past with others.
Wonderful to hear. Ed Walker from Hope into Action, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
That's all we have time for tonight on Community Matters. Let's be a community that lives in peace and harmony. Salaam, shalom, and good night to you all.
Stay tuned to Salaam Radio after this short ad break.